And I don't know why that is, but it's kind of frustrating.
But it is working.
Yeah, I mean, the Zoom is working, but the connection between Zoom and Facebook is not working.
Yeah, but the YouTube
And I
is,
think there's got to be some sort of limit for that. Because what I found is that I don't know why that is, but it's kind of frustrating. What I found is that YouTube works really well. It's worked every single time that I've tried to do it.
mhm.
And I don't understand what the reason for that is, but it is what it is. Okay, so we are live and ready to go, and we'll have a recording. So today we're looking at Tsav, which starts with chapter 6 of Leviticus. And go ahead, Sally. Why don't we just start at the beginning? This is not a very long Torah portion, unless there's a specific part you want to look at.
No, I think the beginning's as good as anywhere else.
Okay, so go ahead.
The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, "Command Joshua and his sons thus. This is the ritual of the burnt offering."
And Aaron and his son.
I'm sorry, yes, Aaron. This is the ritual of the burnt offering. The burnt offering itself shall remain where it is burned upon the altar all night until morning, while the fire on the altar is kept going on it. The priest shall dress in linen raiment with linen breeches next to his body, and he shall take up the ashes to which the fire has reduced the burnt offering in the altar and place them beside the altar. He shall take them off then take off his vestments and put on other vestments and carry the ashes outside the camp to keep to a clean place. The fire on the altar shall be kept burning, not to go out. Every morning the priest shall feed wood to it, lay out the burnt offering on it, and turn into smoke the fat parts of the offerings of well-being. A perpetual fire shall be kept burning on the altar, not to go out. And that's where we get the eternal light from.
Okay,
right?
let's talk about that real quick.
Yeah.
So the perpetual fire, this text, which is the JPS Torah commentary, says the requirement of keeping the fire burning at all times is also implied in verse 2. Here the rendering perpetual is appropriate because our verse explicitly states the fire is not to go out but must burn incessantly. The term tamid, so this is the ner tamid, does not always have the specific meaning as is explained in the comment to verse 12. Usually it means kind of regularly. The perpetual fire on the altar expressed the devotion of the Israelite people to God, indicating that they were attended upon God at all times in the sanctuary. So
isn't the Hebrew Eish Tamid, not near Tamid?
So or H tamid, yeah. I mean, so you have a light, the fire that's burning all the time. So we have a ner, right? Because it's not a fire, but it kind of replaces the same thing. Yeah. And the one of the early Reformed prayer books, the predecessor to the Union prayer book, was called Olat Tamid. David Einhorn's prayer book was Olat Tamid, the eternal sacrifice. It's exactly named after this. The thing we're going to do all the time, the regular offering. Okay.
So there's also the notion, so like on the Sabbath, when you're not allowed to create fire, you're still allowed to add logs to the fire to keep the fire burning perpetually.
Yeah, and it makes sense because this is clearly something that you're required to do. If you're supposed to have it all the time, it shouldn't be going out and turning on. Now, what I mention when I teach about the eternal light in the sanctuary is that it's obviously not an everlasting light. It's obviously not something that's on all the time. There are ways to make it seem like that. I mean, you could have you could have a solar panel based light with battery backup, or with LEDs that goes forever and ever and ever, but eventually it needs repair and it's going to go out. Um, but the idea really for us is that we make sure that it's regularly kept lit, right? So if it's a light bulb, we make sure that we change the light bulbs to keep the light on all the time. If it's an oil lamp, where we have those, we make sure that there's oil in it to keep it running all the time. If it's a candle, obviously we need to replace the candle. You can't have a candle burning forever. It just doesn't work. The charge for us basically is to make sure that we're doing our best to keep the light lit all the time. I
And
think
we,
in the modern world, it's more important to be mindful of that than it is to think about the light being lit all the time. It's our responsibility that's eternal, not necessarily the light. So that's my perspective on it.
I remember one Shabbat when during services, the bulb went out and I was like, did we turn off a switch? It was really,
We actually have two. We actually have two bulbs in there. So in theory, one should be on all the time because there are two of them. So we have the opportunity to light, to make sure there's always one lit. But we have had it in the chapel where there's only one bulb, and that's a different story. In the sanctuary, there are two.
it seems like this can also, especially in our time, be taken from a metaphorical phrase too, of how do we keep the light lit in ourselves in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, it's for sure the case, and that's kind of what I was getting at relighting the eternal light all the time. If you're mindful that it's supposed to be lit all the time, then there are a number of things that impact you. It's not just the light that's impacting you; it is also the requirement of you paying attention to what you need for yourself. So all of that kind of goes together. Okay, I'll continue here. And this is the ritual of the meal offering. Aaron's sons shall present it before Adonai in front of the altar. A handful of the choice flour and oil of the meal offering shall be taken from it, with all the frankincense that is on the meal offering. And this token portion shall be turned into smoke on the altar as a pleasing odor to Adonai. So you make sure that you have the spices that smell good when you light them on fire as part of the meal offering, so that the meal offering smells good. What is left of it shall be eaten by Aaron and his sons. It shall be eaten as unleavened cake. So now we're talking about matzah again in the sacred precinct. They shall eat it in the enclosure of the tent of meeting. A lot of times people think that matzah is just for Passover. Matzah in ancient times was not just for Passover. Matzah was the standard thing that the priests ate. And it was also what you ate your sacrifices with. So that they ate matzah all the time.
But maybe not the matzah that we think of, maybe more like a flat pita or.
It's not a cracker like we have today. Yeah, definitely not a cracker like we have today. You're dealing with something that was more like a tortilla,
which is easier
okay.
and probably tastes
What?
better. Which is easier to eat and probably tastes better, and you can put things on it to eat.
Yeah, I mean, I am one who believes that if it weren't for custom, that it would be okay to eat a tortilla, because a tortilla is clearly what was intended, because that's poor man's bread. In order to make matzah as such, you actually need much more established equipment. To bake something in standard sheets and to have it evenly done in such a way where everything is flat and it's scored and all this kind of stuff takes a much more effort and time and equipment than making a tortilla, throwing it on the back of a hot pan, right? I mean, that's essentially what poor man's bread was. So if you were in a hurry, matzah is not what you would have made. You would have made a tortilla. Okay. It shall not be baked with leaven. I have given it as their portion from my offerings by fire. It is most holy, like the sin offering and the guilt offering. Only the males among Aaron's descendants may eat of it. as their due for all time throughout the ages from Adonai's offerings by fire. Anything that touches these shall become holy. Okay, so this is one of the specific foods of the priests. Okay, that's one of the things to understand. This specific meal offering, is a priestly food as such.
And not brought home for the family like what's from some of the other offerings.
Yeah. So when we're talking about, what when the priests become impure and not able to eat the holy food, this is one of those specific things. Okay, Sally, you want to continue here?
Sure. Verse 12. The Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, This is the offering that Aaron and his sons shall offer to the Eternal on the occasion of his anointment. A tenth of an ephah of choice flour as a regular meal offering, half of it in the morning and half in the evening, shall be prepared with oil on a griddle. You shall bring it well soaked and offer it as a meal offering of baked slices of pleasing odor to the Eternal. And so shall the priest, anointed from among his sons to succeed him, prepare it. It is the Eternal's, a law for all time, to be turned entirely into smoke. So too, every meal offering of a priest shall be a whole offering. It shall not be eaten. Because then the priest
Okay.
is bringing it, so that's is not meant as food for the priest because it's the priest's offering. That's
Yeah,
why.
so you had the food that's offered, the meal offering that comes from a normal person, part of it can go to the priest. The priest's meal offering, none of it can go to the priest. Okay. The Lord spoke to Moses. What?
Nothing. Go
Keep
ahead.
going. You go.
Okay. The Lord
It's
spoke
Lord.
to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons thus. This is the ritual of the sin offering. The sin offering shall be slaughtered before the Eternal to the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is most holy. The priest shall offer it as a sin offering the priest who offers it as a sin offering shall eat of it. It shall be eaten in the sacred precinct in the enclosures of the tent of meeting. Anything that touches its flesh shall become holy. And if any of its blood is spattered upon a garment, you shall wash the bespattered part in the sacred precinct. An earthen vessel in which it is boiled shall be broken. If it was boiled in a copper vessel, the vessel shall be scoured and rinsed with water. Only the males in the priestly line may eat of it. It is most holy. But no sin offering may be eaten from which any blood is brought into the tent of meeting for expiation in the sanctuary. Any such shall be consumed in fire.
Okay. So again, here an offering that's made to Adonai by the priest has to be consumed. So if you take it into the tent of meeting, if it's for that purpose, you can't eat any of it. But if something is brought in from the outside, then the priest can eat of it. What this is telling you is either they would go through a whole lot of clay pots, or they had a whole lot of copper pots. And I think the answer is more the latter, that they were using copper pots as their standard pots, because you obviously would not want to go through a vast quantity of clay pots that you're simply shattering all the time.
And blood
So
would pretty much always be on the priest's garment.
yeah, I mean, so I would assume that they wash their garments every day rather than wash their garments after every sacrifice.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, they just made sure that they're washing them in the sacred precinct. I mean, if you think about just the practical reality of this, that would be how it would need to be done. You would not have the possibility of doing this, after every sacrifice, realistically, unless you were wearing just some sheet or something that you put over for each one, like you were doing a medical thing where you have to change it after every patient or something like that. I don't think that's how they would have done it. I think they would have done things that were more logistically feasible, like washing once a day and that kind of thing. So, okay. So chapter 7, we are now at chapter 7. This is the ritual of the guilt offering. It is most holy. The guilt offering shall be slaughtered at the spot where the burnt offering is slaughtered, and the blood shall be dashed on all sides of the altar. All its fat shall be offered, the broad tail, the fat that covers the entrails, the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is on them at the loins, and the protuberance on the liver, which shall be removed with the kidneys. The priest shall turn them into smoke on the altar as an offering by fire to Adonai. It is a guilt offering. Only the males in the priestly line may eat of it. It shall be eaten in the sacred precinct. It is most holy. So again, priestly food, and these are specific things that only the priests can consume.
And only the male line of priests. Verse 7 or?
So one of the excuse me, one of the notes that's here about this offering is the priest can keep the skin. Oh, well, we're about to get there, I guess. It's a little bit further on. Go ahead with verse 7, Sally.
Okay. The guilt offering is like the sin offering. The same rules apply to both. It shall belong to the priest who makes the expiation thereby. So too, the priest who offers a man's burnt offering shall keep the skin of the burnt offering that he offered. Further, any meal offering that is baked in an oven and any that is prepared in a pan or on a griddle shall belong to the priest who offers it. But every other meal offering with oil mixed in or dry shall go to the sons of Aaron all alike. So this is saying when the member of the community brings the offering, this is what the priest can keep, as opposed to when a priest.
Yes.
Yeah, as opposed to when a priest keeps the offering, makes the offering, then they can't keep any of it.
Yeah, and one of the things the priest got as a benefit was the hide of the animal. That's one of the things that's being explained here. So it says the procedures relevant to the burnt offering meticulously avoid mentioning that the hide of the sacrificial animal should be burned, because in fact it was not to be destroyed. Only in the case of the priestly chatat offering and in similar full offerings was the hide to be destroyed, and that was done outside the camp, not on the altar. In most cases, the officiating priest could keep the hide as his own and profit from its value. So it was also a way to have extra materials for clothing and other things. You didn't want to get rid of something that could be of benefit. So that's part of what's going on here.
And can be shared for the particular priest's family. Because it's not eaten.
So it also seems that there are other kinds of meal offerings that we don't necessarily have listed specifically here. So it may be that there were offerings that you could make that were easier to preserve as you brought them to the temple. That you could turn your meal into something and then bring it to the temple to offer, rather than bringing it plain, which may have been difficult. If you're a poorer person carrying a bunch of flour to the temple, if you're carry it in your hand, for example, because that's all you got, it may spill everywhere or get messed up by the time you get there. But if you're going to bring a cracker or a muffin or something like that, it may be easier to carry and not have it spoil by the time you get it to the temple. So I think there are other forms of offering of material, of grain offering, that were present in ancient times, particularly I think for poor people and for travelers who had to bring things from a distance away. Okay.
Just
this is the ritual. What?
Rashi comments on the one that the priest who offers it, that basically that's talking about that for the ones where it says the priest who offers it, that that only members of the particular priestly family serving on that day are qualified to share in it. So that priests would have different days they were on duty. And that way they'd get different collective.
So this is definitely true later on in the, when you get to the post-Hasmonean Second Temple period. There are so many priests that there are more priests than you need to help the temple function. So there are people who literally cannot work. And so what they did was they had a rotation to enable different families of priests to come in and do the work in the temple and allow them to go back to their possessions in different parts of the country to work their land and all kinds of other stuff the rest of the year. So you would have rotations coming through. They wouldn't spend all year working except for the high priestly family, probably. Prior to that, there was a time period where we don't know whether that functioned or not. And we may well have had different kinds of shrines around the country. It may well have been that, in the first temple period, you could offer these offerings anywhere. In the early part of the second temple period, it may well have been that certain offerings had to be made in Jerusalem, but other offerings could be made, just given to the priest down the street, and he would say a prayer for you and you'd be fine. It just wouldn't meet these requirements, right? I mean, there are different kinds. There may have been certain offerings, maybe these named offerings were ones you could only make in Jerusalem, but these other grain offerings may have been ones you could make, you could bring to the priest down the street from where you were living in the northern part of the country, because you still had to dedicate some of what you made to Adonai. It just doesn't fulfill the specific requirement here. I think the way things actually functioned in the cult is not necessarily fully described in our text, is what I would say. And I think that's probably true with the rabbis, who we know are idealizing what they think should have happened in ancient times. And Rashi's looking back over 1,000 years, but even the rabbis in the first century are looking back hundreds of years, and they're looking back to a system that is not what it used to be already. So they're kind of retrojecting back what they think should have been happening rather than what it was actually happening. And it doesn't necessarily line up with either our text or the archaeology. In fact, it doesn't line up with our text or the archaeology at different time periods. So okay, where are we here?
Verse 11.
There's 11. Okay. This is the ritual of the sacrifice of well-being that one may offer to Adonai. If he offers it for thanksgiving, he shall offer together with the sacrifice of thanksgiving unleavened cakes with oil mixed in, unleavened wafers spread with oil, and cakes of choice flour with oil mixed in, well soaked. This offering with cakes of leavened bread added, he shall offer along with his thanksgiving sacrifice of well-being. Out of this he shall offer one of each kind as a gift to Adonai. It shall go to the priest, who dashes the blood of the offering of well-being, and the flesh of his thanksgiving sacrifice of well-being shall be eaten on the day that is offered. None of it shall be set aside until morning. Okay, so this is the way you would normally do. This is like a fairly common offering. Hey, I want to celebrate. I've got meat today. Let's go to the temple. You make the offering. The priest gets some of it. You get to celebrate. That's the end of that, right? We're celebrating the birth of my child. We're celebrating. That's what you're dealing with here. The offering of thanksgiving.
Well, it's also
I'm
the
happy that this happened. Yes.
It's also the rule for the Passover sacrifice that that they eat of it and they can't have any left over till morning.
Yes. So you're thanking God for saving the people, right? That's what it is. So the Passover offering is an offering of thanksgiving. It's also an offering of protection, asking for protection. So it's a unique offering, but it is a version of a Thanksgiving offering.
And it also requires community or you to have people over because your family, either a lot's going to go to waste, or if you're going to eat the whole thing, you're going to have a bunch of people, most likely, not just, the nuclear family that might exist.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing to understand here, before we just kind of skip over it, is that we usually translate this as offering of well-being, but the root there is shalom. It's shin lamed mem. It is an offering. Shalom means well-being. So to put it in context, this could be a sense of peace, or it could be a sense of completion. It's that you're happy about what's going on, right? That's the idea. Okay, verse 16. Go ahead, Sally.
If, however, the sacrifice he offers is a votive or a free will offering, it shall be eaten on the day that he offers his sacrifice, and what is left of it shall be eaten on the morrow. What is then left of the flesh of the sacrifice shall be consumed in fire on the third day. Basically, they didn't have good preservation stuff, so it would go bad by the third day.
Yeah.
If any of the flesh of a sacrifice of well-being is eaten on the third day, it shall not be acceptable. It shall not count for him who offered it. It is an offensive thing, and the person who eats of it shall bear his guilt or get sick. The flesh that touches anything unclean will not be eaten. It shall be consumed in fire. As for other flesh, only he who is clean may eat such flesh. But the person who, in the state of uncleanness, eats flesh of the eternal sacrifices of well-being, that person shall be cut off from his kin.
Okay, so this is important to understand here, because this is one of the real concerns in the tradition, that you're dealing with holy food, and if somebody who's unclean touches the holy food, you're violating the food, and since the food to a certain extent belongs to Adonai, you're then in a position where you're committing a violation against Adonai also. It's not just a matter of violating the food. You want to go ahead and finish that paragraph here.
When a person touches anything unclean, be it human uncleanness or an unclean animal or an unclean creature, and eats flesh from the eternal sacrifices of well-being, that person shall be cut off from his kin.
Okay. So it is possible that what we're talking about here is that when you're ritually impure, you have to stay away from your family until you purify yourself and are able to come back. Which speaks well to our situation of making sure that people are not transmitting germs, because the idea of transmitting impurity and transmitting germs is very similar. So you isolate yourself when you're impure so that you don't transmit your impurity to other people. Your goal is to become pure, so you go and you perform the rituals that would once again give you ritual purity, and then once you're pure, you can go back to your family and you can eat of the food again.
And who takes care of the kids, given the lengths of women's impurity, as they stay in the red tent or wherever?
The priest had servants or the older kids. That's the answer. It probably would not have been the priest, that's for sure.
Yeah. But it is where you get things like the notions of things like the red tent.
Yes.
Where one.
Okay. Verse 22 here. And Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus: You shall eat no fat of ox or sheep or goat, Fat from animals that died or were torn by beasts may be put to any use, but you must not eat it, which means you could use it for fuel, honestly, but you can't eat it. If anyone eats the fat of animals from which offerings by fire may be made to Adonai, the person who eats it shall be cut off from his kin. And you must not consume any blood, either of bird or animal, in any of your settlements. Okay, so no bats. There you go. No bats. Anyone who eats blood shall be cut off from his kin. And Adonai spoke. Okay,
Wait,
so we got that. Yeah.
there, when it says the no fat, one of the things I thought of was, my people used to use chicken fat. So before there was good oleomargarine with no dairy in it, a kosher home, I know my mother did, if we were having a meat meal, let's say steak and potatoes, should serve the chicken fat to use instead of butter to stay kosher. So that's interesting that that would not have been appropriate under these laws, but I think it was a common use.
Well, so what's interesting here, chicken fat is not forbidden,
Oh, okay.
right? Because it's you shall not eat fat of ox or sheep or goat, and you can't use fat from any animals that died, were torn by beasts, and you can't use blood from birds or any other animal, but you can use fat from birds.
Okay.
So chicken fat actually works.
I think it was a common substitute for butter with the meat meal.
Yeah, I mean, and probably oil, right? I mean, when you're living when they're living in Europe, they didn't have olives everywhere, so it's different. When they're living in Mediterranean climate, the people had an abundance of olive oil. They could cook everything in olive oil. There were olives everywhere. There were seasons where they had vats of olive oil that they were shipping to other parts of the world, so that everybody else could have olive oil. But if you're in a poor village, a poor shtetl in Ashkenaz, you're certainly not going to have very much access to olive oil. So you're going to do whatever you can, and using chicken fat would make some sense there.
Yeah, because you
Okay.
can't, it's either milk, you either use milk, butter for your dairy, and then you use chicken fat for your meat.
Yep. Okay, go ahead with verse 28.
And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the Israelite people thus. The offering to the Eternal from a sacrifice of well-being must be presented by him who offers his sacrifice of well-being to the Eternal. His own hands shall present the Eternal's offering by fire. He shall present the fat with the breast to be elevated as an elevation offering before the Eternal. The priest shall turn the fat into smoke on the altar, and the breast shall go to Aaron and his sons. And the right thigh of from your sacrifices of well-being you shall present to the priest as a gift. He from among Aaron's sons who offers the blood and the fat of the offering of well-being shall get the right thigh of his portion. For I have taken the breast of elevation offering and the thigh of gift offering from the Israelites from their sacrifices of well-being, and given them to Aaron the priest and to his sons as their due from the Israelites for all time.
Okay.
When it says you'll be present, it really means you'll present it. You're not going to get into further into the holy spaces of the temple, though, right?
Yeah. So basically, the priest is the agent, right, of you're doing this. So you bring it to the priest brings it in, and he's going to present it before Adonai. And then, these portions of birds become the property of the priest after having done that.
So what's the elevation offering?
So these are let's see if I can get a good description here. Okay, so the Mishnah described it as the offering was carried to and fro in a raised position, the intent being to show the offering to God for his acceptance. So it, let's see here.
This sort of calls it also a gift offering or wave. Yeah, Rashi says waved.
I mean, I think this is kind of like, raising a toast to a certain extent. It's not it's not a big offering. You're offering a bird, the priest can hold it up and make a show of it. And it's a quick offering that makes everybody happy.
Is it a
Now,
bird? Because how do you have the right thigh if it's a bird?
well, I mean, if you have a chicken, it's like the thigh meat, right? The
Okay,
same.
the leg.
I mean, I think the idea, it may be that a portion of it goes to the person, portion of it goes to God, a portion of it goes to the priest, and then everybody's happy. It's just a way of celebrating, with an offering. And the thigh meat is the most tasty meat.
Not everybody likes the legs.
Not
And
everybody likes dark meat and chicken. I get it, but the thigh meat is the most tasty meat, so that may be part of what's going on here. Okay, so verse 35. Those shall be the prerequisites or perquisites of Aaron and the perquisites of his son from Adonai's offerings by fire once they have been inducted to serve as the Adonai as priests. These Adonai commanded to be given them once they have been anointed as a due from the Israelites for all time throughout the ages. Such are the rituals of the burnt offering, the meal offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the offering of ordination, and the sacrifice of well-being, with which what Adonai charged Moses on Mount Sinai when he commanded that the Israelites present their offerings to Adonai in the wilderness of Sinai. So one of the things that's interesting to point out is that my JPS commentary here says, whereas there is a Torah in chapters 6 and 7 for the other items summarized in this verse, there is none for the ordination of priests. The only possible reference here in chapter 6 and 7 would be the mincha offering offered by the high priest and prescribed in chapter 16, verses 12 to 16. The ordination rites themselves are described in chapters 8 and 9 later on. So, I mean, it's possible that this is a summary that's stuck in here, which really is a little bit out of place because it's coming before all of the offerings are even described. It could be something that got moved around at some point in time in the text. It could be that there's a chunk of the text that was taken out entirely because it was repeated later. We don't know. We're not in our tradition anyway, in the Reformed tradition, we don't believe we're dealing with a text that was given verbatim, translated to us verbatim by God to Moses to us, and therefore there can be editing, and this may well be part of it, and that's what we're looking at. Okay, now we're in chapter 8, Leviticus chapter 8. Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, take Aaron along with his sons and the vestments, the anointing oil, the bowl of sin offering, the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread, and assemble the whole community at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Moses did as Adonai commanded him, and when the community was assembled at the entrance of the tent of meeting, Moses said to the community, "This is what Adonai has commanded to be done." Okay, Sally.
Then Moses brought Aaron and his sons forward and washed them with water. He put the tunic on him, girded him with the sash, clothed him with the robe, and put an ephod on him, girding him with the decorated band with which he tied it to him. He put the breastpiece on him and put into the breastpiece the Urim and Thummim. And he set the headdress on his head, and on the headdress in front, he put the gold frontlet, the holy diadem, as the Eternal had commanded Moses. And then Aaron fell over because of the weight of everything on him. Sorry. Good.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty heavy. Royalty when they're in full garb has a lot of weight. So
Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and all that was in it, thus consecrating them. He sprinkled some of it on the altar 7 times, anointing the altar, all its utensils, the laver with its stand to consecrate them. He poured some of the anointing oil upon Aaron's head and anointed him to consecrate him. Moses then brought Aaron's sons forward, clothed them in tunics, girded them with sashes, and wound turbans upon them, and as the Eternal had commanded Moses. He led forward the bowl of sin offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the head of the bowl of sin offering, and it was slaughtered. Moses took the head and with his finger put some on each of the horns of the altar, cleansing the altar. Then he poured out the blood at the base of the altar. Thus he consecrated it in order to make expiation upon it. Moses then took all the fat that was about the entrails and the protuberance of the liver and the 2 kidneys and their fat and turned them into smoke on the altar. The rest of the bull and its hide, its flesh, and its dung he put into the fire outside the camp as the Eternal had commanded Moses. Then he brought forward the ram of burnt offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands upon the ram's head, and it was slaughtered. Moses dashed the blood against all sides of the altar. The ram was cut up into sections, and Moses turned the head and the sections and the suet into smoke on the altar. Moses washed the entrails and the legs with water and turned all the ram into smoke. That was the burnt offering for a pleasing odor, an offering by fire to the Eternal, as the Eternal had commanded Moses. Is this supposed to be done every time there's a new high priest, or is this just the Aaron one?
So I think the idea is that this is the ritual that you would use to anoint any priest, all the priests eventually, or at least all the high priests, the high priest family. Right? And I make the point that the sons of the high priest were anointed, right? So that this is a ceremony to anoint the sons of the high priest. However, having said that, what's also interesting here is that you have Moses acting as a priest. And we have the tradition we find in, in Judges, where you have a Mosaic priest, right? The tribe of Dan, there's a Mosaic priest. And it may be that there was a certain group of priests who claimed descent from Moses, or it could be that there was a group of priests whose job it was to ordain the other priests, and that's basically all they did. I don't know, but here we've got Moses acting as a priest, anointing the other priests. So we have the remnants of some sort of tradition here. I mean, obviously somebody would have to ordain Aaron first as the first priest. That's the way that I think the tradition looks at this. But it could be the remnant of something bigger than that, and I think that's also worth noting. Okay. So where are we here? We're verse 18.
22.
Verse 22. He brought forward the second ram, the ram of ordination. So here's our ram of ordination, and it was slaughtered. Moses took some of its blood and put it on the ridge of Aaron's right ear, and on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Moses then brought forward the sons of Aaron and put some of the blood on the ridges of their right ears and on the thumbs of their right hands and on the big toes of their right feet. And the rest of the blood Moses dashed against every side of the altar. He took the fat, the broad tail, and all the fat about the entrails, the protuberance of the liver and the two kidneys and their fat, and the right thigh. From the basket of unleavened bread that was before Adonai, he took 1 cake of unleavened bread, 1 cake of oil bread, and 1 wafer. Okay, so we got all different kinds of bread, and placed them on the fat parts and on the right thigh. He placed all these on the palms of Aaron and on the palms of his sons and elevated them as an elevation offering before Adonai. Then Moses took from their hands and turned them into smoke on the altar with the burnt offering. This was an ordination offering for a pleasing odor. It was an offering by fire to Adonai. Moses took the breast and elevated it as an elevation offering before Adonai. It was Moses' portion of the ram of ordination, as Adonai commanded Moses.
So what's this with the right side instead of the left side? We were reading something else, my students and I, and there was comments about, well, he was left-handed. Is the biblical text as anti-left-handedness as some later cultures became?
Yeah, my guess is it's cultural. I mean, it's a cultural thing in the Arab world too. I don't know beyond that, honestly, where this comes from. So the assumption obviously is that people are right hand dominant, but I don't know. No, I don't think that's the reason. I think it's more of a cultural thing. And I mean, this ritual. I mean, why ear, thumb, and toe? I mean, right? It's. I mean, clearly you're
You've got the Shabbat feeling.
you got Shabbat feeling, yeah. I mean, it could be related. You know, at one point I thought it was potentially related to the cherubim, where they have 3 pairs of wings, and these are one of your pairs of wings. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. You got arms are your pair of wings, your legs are a pair of wings, and the third pair of wings are these guys. I don't know. I mean, I don't know why you would do that. So I mean, this is one of those things where you look at it. It's a ritual. It's probably a very ancient ritual, even longer, beyond this. And I don't know that we have an origin explanation for it. Okay, so I think we're going to stop there and get ready for our Shabbat morning service. I'm going to end this live stream, and then we'll start again. And I'm going to try to do Facebook again. And if we can't do Facebook again, we'll come back to YouTube.
So do I go off this?
It'll be the same link on Zoom. So I'm gonna log off here and log right back on.
Okay.
Same link on Zoom.
All right.